Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Draft Talk on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm Alan Saunders. That's Nick Farabaugh. We're going to jump right into it, but before we get started, want to make sure you all are aware how you can find the show. You can find us here on the YouTube platform. If you're watching on video, you can also check us out on audio through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all that. And there's lots of ways to get a hold of Nick and I as we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of this draft. Nick and I have been to the Combine, we've been to the Senior Bowl, we've been to Pro Days, and now we're going to really start to put together our list of what we think the top draft prospects are, who we think the best fits are for the Steelers, where their picks fall, and we want to hear from you. What do you want to know? What do you want to hear? Who do you want to learn about? So reach out to us on Twitter, in the YouTube comments, and we will get to them. We will answer your questions about the draft. Today, I think we're going to talk about quarterbacks, and we're going to specifically talk about the way we think about these quarterbacks, maybe as opposed to trying to predict what's going to happen. It's a very interesting quarterback class, especially with about a half dozen day one or two prospects. So I think we're going to start there. Nick, I mean, I just saw a mock draft today that had the Steelers trading up to 5 to draft Malik Willis. It doesn't seem like a very Steelersy move, but to me, it kind of feels like what is going to be required to, if the Steelers want to be sure they get a Malik Willis, that's what they're going to have to do. I think the big question on most people's minds is he worth that? And so I think that's how we're going to approach this is, we'll start with Malik Willis because I'm pretty sure both of us agree that he's the top quarterback in the draft, at least from our perspective. But would you pay the price to go up to number 5 to get him? Where should he fall in this draft, and what is a reasonable cost to pay to get him?
Well, first of all, I do think he is quarterback 1, if we're talking about that personally. And again, he's no sure thing. So we're not talking about a Trevor Lawrence here. We're not talking about a Justin Fields. We're not talking about a guy like that. We are talking about a guy that is pure raw talent. We're talking about a Josh Allen type prospect in terms of how raw he is. He's going to need a few years of work. Even early Josh Allen at the Bills was a bad quarterback, right? You rookie year Josh Allen, fun, not good. That's kind of the type of guy you're getting when you like Willis. But if you can improve upon him, you have what you have in Josh Allen, which is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. So this is why he is quarterback 1, in my opinion. That is why he is so intriguing. But I think there's only a price you can pay for a guy like that because Allen was such an outlier. We've had guys like Josh Allen before that completely bust out of the league and are gone in 4 years. And Allen has really proven to be he's the exception, right? He's the exception to the rule. So can Malik Willis be another exception to the rule? He has dynamic athleticism, so possibly, but he's a very raw quarterback. So you're going to have patience with him. You're going to have to sit there with him. I don't know if I would trade up to 5 to get 2 1s and 2 2s to get Malik Willis. If I were to do that, again, I would have to feel a lot more certain about his prospects. And see, that's a deal I would do for last year. I would have done for a Justin Fields because I very much believe that Justin Fields is very ready mentally to come out. And I felt like he was going to have a pretty good start to his career. And I thought, given the situation he was in Chicago, I think Justin Fields did about as well as he could have done. That was a disaster, a dumpster fire he walked into. And he had some really good flashes. Just look at what he did in Pittsburgh, right? So I don't know what you would do to give up for Malik Willis. I mean, I think I personally would move up the board, but I don't think I'd give up that much because while I see the potential, I don't necessarily think he's a slam dunk franchise quarterback, and that scares me a little bit.
I totally agree. And to be clear, I'm not saying that's too much to get to number 5. I think the proposed trade was fair. I don't think I'd take him at number 5 if I was sitting there either. I don't think that's good value for the player. One of the things I think is really important to talk about here is, anytime you're talking about a player where you're not sure what their floor is, right? You're opening the possibility of that player being a pretty good quarterback that you don't want to sign to that big money contract the second time around, right? Like we saw Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Like a pretty good quarterback, but the 49ers did not want to say, okay, here's $50 million a year. And have that be their answer. We're seeing the Browns go through that with Baker Mayfield. We're not sure what the Ravens are going to do with Lamar Jackson, right? Like those are quarterbacks where if they were signed cheaply or you had success on their rookie contract, you can win with them. But I don't think you can pay guys like that big money and still win. And so anytime you're talking about a player where you're not sure where their floor is, you're introducing the possibility that they're the kind of guy that just lands in the middle, right? They're a player that is good enough to be a starting quarterback in the NFL, but not the kind of guy who's going to be a perennial all-pro that you're going to want to give a blank check at the end of his 5 years. And then when you take that part of it and you add Malik Willis is almost definitely not going to contribute in 2022 for whoever drafts him because he needs time to develop. Now you're cutting it by a fifth the benefit of playing this guy on a rookie contract, and so a player like Pickett or like Ritter does not have Willis's upside, but I think their immediate their experience and their ability to be an immediate contributor makes them really attractive. And then there's other factors as well, like Pickett's been talked about to Carolina a lot. There's a coach on a hot seat. He's going to want a player that's immediately available to turn his fortune around. He doesn't have a year to wait and sit here to see if Malik Willis is going to be good. So I just think that, questions about his floor and the fact that I think most people think he's a year away limits the usefulness of trading up to go get or drafting highly a player like Willis.
Here's also a thing. It's not like he's 20. He's 20. He's going to be 23.
Yeah.
He's a 23-year-old rookie. So it's not like he's like 20. Like Lamar Jackson coming into the league, if you thought he was 20 years old. So you were going to get a 21-year-old Lamar Jackson starting his career, right? And that's exactly what happened. Now, he got thrust in a little earlier and obviously was really good, but he's grown his game. So you had a young quarterback there in terms of that type of player. If you're getting a raw type of player, I think Josh Allen was also relatively younger. So when you look at Malik Willis, it's not like he's going to be a super young quarterback. Yeah. And so, Josh Allen was a 21-year-old coming into the league. Like, that is a significant difference. So Malik Willis is going to be 23 years old as a rookie. So his first year playing, he's probably going to be a 24-year-old. And with his style of play as well, with his rushing ability, how reckless he plays, and how much he loves to use his athleticism. Again, I'm all for it because it's literally one of the best parts of this game. He's such a dynamic player, but let's be real here. It's not always going to hold up in the best way possible. So I don't know. Malik Willis is obviously quarterback one because he has these unbelievable tools and he has easily the high ceiling. But there's also a possibility because he is 23 that he ends up kind of moving up through his 24-25 season and then kind of stalls out right here in the middle where he's this good quarterback with a strong arm and really athletic, but he's not necessarily an accurate thrower of the football. And I mean, again, that's kind of what you're talking about, where you might get the middle part of kind of Malik Willis, where he ends up being a really good quarterback relative to the NFL starting quarterback. Maybe he's not a franchise guy.
Yeah, and I think like if you look at Lamar Jackson, like if is he a guy that can lead you to a Super Bowl all by himself? I think that's still an unresolved question, right? Like, and that's certainly within the realm of outcomes for Willis. So I think we both agree that either the Steelers trading up to 5 or a team taking him at that point is not a good idea. Where down the list would you pull the trigger? If you're the Steelers, where does he have to fall before trading up becomes realistic? And if you're another quarterback needy team, is it Seattle at 9? Is it Washington a few picks later? Where do you put him as a natural fit where he becomes good value?
Well, I would take him. I don't know if I'd take him in the top 10. I think that one is a little risky. Top 15, I think I would. So if I was Washington at 11, I'd think about it. I even think if I'm Seattle at 9, I said I wouldn't. I said I wouldn't take him in the top 10, but 9 versus 11 is so marginal, right? That I think you have to think about it. Now, if I'm Carolina, I'll say this. Atlanta.
And the Jets have pick 10 at the second of their 2 first-round picks, so anybody could trade up to 10. So it doesn't even need to be a team that's in that. Like, anybody can get there.
Yeah, and so I'll say this: if I were picking, just sitting there in the top 10, I would start thinking about it. If I were Atlanta at 8, I think that's where I would start. If I was Carolina at 6, I wouldn't. If I was Detroit at 2, I think that's very rich. Houston at 3, very rich again, and I would not trade up for that either. But if I'm sitting there at 8, I think I start thinking about it. If I sit there at 9, I definitely think about it. 11, certainly. And then really after that, it's really just New Orleans. And at 18 or 20,
Houston
New
at
Orleans or
13,
Pittsburgh.
maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I would, again, 13, 18, 20, that's an easy pick if he's sitting there with his upside. But I think maybe if you're starting at 8 with the Falcons is where you start thinking about it. And if you start trading up, probably want to get in front of the Saints in some manner. Because let's be real, if he gets past Washington, there's really no one there. And who's going to trade up for him? Maybe Tampa Bay with Tom Brady, or do they want to go in on Tom Brady one more time? Tennessee with Tannehill, if they're looking
moving back up, maybe.
Yeah, right. And we've heard these rumors that maybe Tennessee's trying to move on from Ryan Tannehill, so that's got to be a factor, right? Maybe Tennessee wants to come up and pull what Kansas City did with Smith to Mahomes, like that's a possibility. So like those are the teams. So you probably want to trade up like 5, 6 spots, and you'd maybe give up. I don't even know if you'd give up a future first doing that, but I would do it if I needed to do it, because like again, that like if I get him at like 15. I'm thinking to myself, wow, I just took a home run swing and a really good value at that.
Yeah, I think the place that it starts being realistic is that Jets pick at 10. I think to get ahead of Washington and to a lesser extent, Minnesota and Houston at 12 and 13. I think all three of those teams are teams that could take him. I'm not saying that they will, but those are places where you could see him landing. I think it starts to make sense for a team that's trading up, and it's been reported that the Jets aren't interested in a quarterback, although I think I'd rather have Malik Willis than Zach Wilson. But 10 to me feels like the place where the value starts to be right, specifically for the Steelers. It's a trade up that we know they're comfortable with. They made that exact jump to get Devin Bush. I think that is the kind of Goldilocks zone for me. So maybe a little bit higher. But I mean, I don't think any higher than that because, well, you know, I think he's going to go to Seattle at 9. Personally, I think that's the pick for him. That's my prediction. But just talking about what we would do and specifically what the Steelers could do, I think trading to 10 is about the highest I would go. On the other end, if he's there at 20, Mike Tomlin might break the combine 40 time getting to the podium with the pick.
John Ross will have to look out for that because he might run a 4-1 with that. If he makes it to 20, that's like one of the easiest picks you could ever make. That's phenomenal value for a guy with those tools. If that's what, like even in a normal draft, that is a really good value pick. So yeah, I agree. If he's a 20, easy pick.
Let's move on to quarterback 2. For me, that's Kenny Pickett. Are you on the same wavelength there?
I am, though it's close for me because I'll say this: I think like QB3 has grown on me in recent weeks, although I'm not a huge fan of them. But yeah, I think Kenny Pickett is my quarterback 2, and again, that's not that I don't have issues with what Kenny Pickett does. I do. He's a safe prospect, and you kind of alluded to this earlier. But if you're a GM that needs to save their job, this is the guy you want. Like the safe floor option. Kenny Pickett feels like a see what you get, you're gonna get. And so I think Pickett's a really solid player. Again, smart, accurate, athletic, great intangibles, tough, all these different types of tangible qualities you get with him. Very safe guy that has grown every year a bit. We've seen him, you and I have seen him for years here at Pitt. He has grown as a player, and I think he's pretty capped out at this point. Very clean in terms of his mechanics, doesn't need a lot of work there. Like the biggest issues with him are the antsiness in the pocket, which is his pocket management, which gets a little bit of an issue. And then a little bit of his mental processing. I think he can still be a little square late over the middle of the field a little bit. It did feel like, you and me know this. He always takes that extra pat on the ball, or he'll like double hop back. Like that's an extra hitch you take every time, but could be a coaching thing with Mark Whipple and all that. But
I think the antsiness in the pocket has something to do with Pitt's offensive line play his first couple of years too.
Yeah, probably it does. But again, that is now a habit. So we'll see if that sticks. If he gets behind like a really good offensive line, is he going to be that antsy? He wasn't as antsy this past year when Pitt had probably the best O-line of his entire career. So maybe that improves if he gets a really good NFL offensive line. But I look at him and I just think safe. Just safe. Again, his arm is stronger than people give him credit for. I see people say he has like below average arm strength. Like, I don't see that. I think he has average to slightly above average. Like, his arm, like, people keep saying he has below average arm strength, but then we'll turn around and say Joe Burrow has really good arm strength. Like, those two have like very similar arm strength. If
There's a
not,
lot
if
of
Pickett
Joe
doesn't have better,
Burrow. I mean, I'm not making the like one-to-one comparison, but physically, there's a lot of Joe Burrow there.
yeah, I mean, there is, right? And so, like, honestly, like, Kenny at his ceiling is like what, a more athletic Kirk Cousins. Like, that's
I think Kenny at his
kind of,
ceiling is basically Burrow. I mean, I think that's
yeah,
the absolute ceiling.
yeah. I mean, that's the absolute ceiling. And again, he has a little bit to move, but like middle of the road scenario where he ends up, he's like Kirk Cousins ish kind of. And then in the worst case scenario, like, and people give Kirk Cousins a lot of crap, and I get it, he's not necessarily a franchise quarterback, but I really think it's only because he gets paid $40 million a year. Like, if you tell me right now, if someone told you you can get Kirk Cousins for 5 years on a rookie contract, you would not take Kirk Cousins. Like,
Absolutely.
you would take Kirk Cousins, like, 100%. And like, what's the worst outcome for Kenny? Teddy Bridgewater? Like, very safe prospect, very safe floor, not a super high ceiling. I don't know if he has a Burrow ceiling. I've told you this before. I think his ceiling's like Dak, kind of, which is a little less than Burrow in my opinion. But again, I think he's a very safe prospect.
Yeah, I agree on all that. And I think that when you're talking about, people, the sort of argument about this class has been, oh, it's not that good of a quarterback class. But then again, every NFL team is desperate for a quarterback. So how much does it really matter that's not a good quarterback class? The place that it matters is safe prospects, right? Because the people that are desperate for quarterbacks are the people that don't have time to wait for a quarterback to develop. So a player like Kenny Pickett, to me, will take more advantage of the desperation of teams to draft a quarterback than a player like Malik Willis, because he's a right now ready to go prospect, and his intangibles being through the roof makes him a very safe bet for teams. He's an incredibly fierce competitor. He's tough. He's smart. He's a good leader. He's, exactly the kind of player you can envision coming into the league right away and having success. And so I think that's what makes him so valuable for teams. I think clearly for me, behind Willis, just because he doesn't have the same top end upside, but I don't really see this like massive 10, 15, 20 pick separation between the two of those guys, just because I think Pickett's floor being so high is really going to keep his draft stock up there. I think well, I mean, from a prediction standpoint, I'm not going to leave Carolina until they give me a good reason to. Maybe they trade down a couple picks and are still able to get him, but I think Carolina really wants him. But I think anywhere in that spot between that 10 pick and where the Steelers at 20 is good value for Pickett.
Yeah, I think that's a good value spot for him, and again, a really safe type of prospect. If he makes it to 20, you probably take him pretty easily. And a very, very easy type of projectable player. So again, I think Pickett is very safe, does what he does. He's going to be a pretty solid NFL quarterback, and that's kind of what you get. And again, similar to Malik Willis's range in terms of where I would take him. I think I'd take Willis earlier, again, because I would think about Willis at 8. I wouldn't think about Pickett at 8. I would think about Pickett more so around 14, 15-ish. That's kind of where I would take him. Certainly, if he makes it to 20, that's an easy, I think, pick, as long as Willis isn't there, of course.
Yeah, I agree. Easy pick at 20, and really the last of those, I think, as we move forward. For me, QB3 is Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. Are you on board with that?
Yeah, I am. And again, I Desmond Ridder has been kind of climbing my personal board a little bit recently, because there is an intrigue to Desmond Ridder that he brings because of how advanced he is with his mental processing. And he is so intelligent in terms of his reads and how he goes about that. His intangibles are great. He's athletic, obviously was one of the more athletic players, period, in terms of the combine ever at the quarterback position, because he ran a 4.54. He looked really good. He didn't run a ton at Cincinnati, but when he did, he was really good at it. So maybe using that a little bit more selectively. But again, the issue has always been for him, it's always been accuracy because of his mechanics. So that's the biggest thing. He's got this mental processing thing that's down, and that's like such a hard thing to get down. But on the other hand, the guy can't deliver the ball accurately half the time. So what are you going to do in terms of that? Because he has never, ever hit. If you look at the college football average completion percentage, Ritter's never hit that mark in his entire career at Cincinnati, which is a concern. And so you're going to have to work on his release. You're going to have to work on his footwork. You're going to have to work on his base. You're going to have to work on all of that. He needs a complete overhaul mechanically. And so that's a question. And again, I don't think his arm's bad. I think it's like in Kenny Pickett territory, but I don't think he has this dynamic arm talent that Malik Willis has either. So he works out again. I think he has a similar ceiling to Kenny Pickett. If he works out, he's probably like a Dak Prescott type of player. And so that's a good bet on him. But the difference is he doesn't have the exact floor of Kenny Pickett. And that's why you have him 3, right? Because you don't have the floor. But you might have a little bit more upside. You certainly have that mental aspect where Ritter can come in. And if you need him to, could play year 1 from that standpoint. You just got to live with the misses early on. And you can improve those mechanics, though. It's going to take a year or 2 to get those fully going. But if you can improve that, you're going to have a really good NFL starter in Desmond Ritter.
Yeah, I think the more I've watched Ritter, the more I've felt good about him as a pick. I actually, at the Senior Bowl, was not that impressed with him. I thought throwing against the air, he didn't look as good as the other quarterbacks. I think he's a player that does better in competition. Is still not very accurate, though, and that's a big problem. I mean, Kevin Colbert said early in this process this offseason that he thought accuracy is the number 1 trait to look for in a quarterback, that's the thing that translates to NFL success, and I just don't think Desmond Ritter has it at the same level the other guys we're talking about. I do think he's a useful quarterback and a probable NFL starter, but for me, he's more of a back of the first round kind of guy. I don't think that he has either Willis's upside or Pickett's floor, and that just leaves him kind of stuck in the middle in not necessarily a good way. I think where the Steelers drafted 20 is about the absolute earliest I could justify taking him, and me personally, I think would probably be more in the 25 to 32 range. I don't know. Where are you with Ritter?
I would take him at 20. I don't necessarily think it's a terrible pick. It's not like the difference between Pickett and Willis is I don't care who else is on the board. I would take Pickett and Willis. Ritter, I would have to think about it. Like, for example, if we have Derek Stingley fall to 20, I have to seriously think about Derek Stingley.
I'd take Stingley.
Right.
I'd take Jordan Davis. I
would take Jordan Davis. I might take Devontae Wyatt. I might take one of those guys.
Chris Olave, Zion Johnson.
I think I would take Ritter over those 2. I think I would not take Ritter over Garrett Wilson, the other Ohio State guy, because he's my wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be there 20, but yeah.
No, I don't either. But I would take those guys over them. If any of the 3 tackles fell, Cross, Aquonu, or Neal for some reason. Kyle Hamilton is now falling.
Saw a mock with Cross not in the first round today, and I was just like,
yeah, I don't know. But if any of those guys are there at 20, I take them. I think the real interesting debate is say all those guys are gone and you get someone like Booth there at 20. Like if it's Booth versus Ritter, I think that's a really interesting debate to have. Because again, I think Booth has quarterback 1 potential. And then you have Ritter, who I think has NFL starting potential. But again, 20 is – I don't love the Ritter pick at 20. Ideally, I think you pick him in the back end of the first. The Steelers are kind of in that gray zone where it's kind of a reach, but also you're okay, I see why he's probably going to – if you put them back at 25 and took him, you'd be like, oh, yeah, that's fair value for Desmond Ritter. Yeah, so and if they think he's the guy, why? Trading back, we can say, yeah, trade back and get him. But if you think he's the guy, regardless, just take him at 20. So really, there's no reason to trade back.
I guess the reason to trade back might be in the next part of our conversation is how much of a separation between Ritter and the other 2 guys we're going to talk about do you think there is? Because if you think they're all the same and all 3 are available, then trading back makes sense. If you think Ritter is a lot better than the other 2, then you should just sit there and take him. So let's move ahead. For me, quarterback 4 is Sam Howell. I don't know about you.
No, mine's Matt Corral.
Okay. Well, let's start with Corral then. I see Corral as an incredible athlete and a very big question mark as far as a processing quarterback that has some upside and maybe more upside than Howell probably, but I got big questions about how he translates the skills to the NFL.
I do. I also have many questions about Sam Howell and how he brings there. I think the thing about Corral that gets me kind of going a little bit outside of that athleticism and those intangibles are that I find Matt Corral to be a guy that has at least shown me some flashes of that mental ability. Like, again, it's a question. He's coming from a heavy RPO scheme, so I get it. He's not going to have RPOs every other play like he did at Ole Miss. He's not going to have those crutches to work on. They're not going to make it a one read thing for him. Every play is going to have to go through 1 to 2 to 3 and hit it like that. But you can ease his transition a little bit. Triangle reads, getting him into like 50% RPO offenses, which is a real thing in the NFL. Like nowadays, like he could still run a heavy RPO offense, play action. I think he's got like really good traits to work as a game manager guy early with a little bit more athleticism. So I can see a track to Corral going here year one, maybe late year one, early year two, that he could be a viable NFL starter. And I don't really see an upside where he's necessarily a franchise quarterback, but I do see a guy here in Matt Corral that has pretty decent athleticism, has a decent arm. I think the accuracy is pretty good, honestly. The mechanics are a little wonky. I don't love his footwork, but it's not as stark. I think he's pretty clean overall. It's minor tweaks to that that will help him improve the accuracy a little bit more. So I see translatable things with the athleticism and kind of what he brings. I don't necessarily see as much with Sam Howell, because I think the difference between Howell and Corral is I see them as very similar players. RPO heavy offense is going to have a trouble advancing in terms of the mental game. The difference is I think Corral's a little bit more athletic. And second, I also think Corral is more clean mechanically. And also, I will say this, I don't think he deals with pressure like great, but Howell completely collapses when pressure gets in his place. And I did not see the same Corral.
I agree with all that. I just think Howell's a more polished passer. And if you look at if you're going to put one of those guys into a system where you're going to build it around them and try to tailor them to their strengths, I think either of them could have success. But if you need one of them to go play a typical NFL offense right now, I have a lot more faith in Howell's ability to execute that than Corral's. I think he's more accurate on short and medium passes. I think he has a better feel for scheme than Corral does right now. I just think, but Corral, I love his toughness and his athletic ability. We were looking for a comparison for him, and I used Taysom Hill. I think he has the athleticism to maybe stick in the NFL if it's not a quarterback. I just think he's a useful player and a player that somebody could maybe make a package around if they have another quarterback to say, okay, we're going to let Matt Corral run this RPO set and do that kind of thing. I think that's possible too. I just think Howell is a more polished player right away. I loved his junior year tape. Things kind of fell apart for him this year. I think that brings big questions about his upside and his total ability, but I think I still have faith in his ability to be at least an average NFL quarterback. I don't know about more than that, but I mean, I think when you're looking at quarterback 4, that's pretty much what you're looking at. Where would you take either of these guys? Where do you think is a reasonable place for them to be drafted?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't take either of them in the first round. Second round, I would think about it probably. I think that's reasonable. Because of the quarterback premium, these are both guys that I have like third round grades on, but for a quarterback, you can bump that up around essentially. So second roundish, if either of them are there at 52, I definitely think about that for sure. I think that's good value for both these guys because I do think they have upside to be starting quarterbacks in this league. Don't think they're going to be franchise guys because again, I'm not really a Howell guy much. I don't love Corral, but I see the appeal with him. But I think in that second round, if I'm in Indianapolis, I think about both of these guys, potentially developing them into something, getting some stability at that quarterback position. If there are some second round teams there in that middle of the second round, I think that makes some sense for both of these players. So I think Yeah, like 45-ish, 40-ish, somewhere around there. I have to start thinking about both these guys coming off the board.
Yeah, I'm in agreement that even though if you have a quibble with the order, I don't think there's a big difference in their draft stock, right? Like I don't think like taking one 10 picks ahead of the other. Well, I just there's not that much of a difference. I think it's a lot of preference, and I think both of them. I could if there's a team that's going to take him early in the second round, I could see someone trying to get up to 32 just to get a fifth year for him. If you're going to take him at 40, you may as well. But other than that, yeah, I'm with you. Second round, I think ahead of this, like if one of them gets to 52, I think that's a good value pick for the Steelers at 52. Like just like we talked about Willis and Pickett at 20, like I think that's a pretty easy pick if they haven't already taken the quarterback for the Steelers to make it 52 if one of those guys is available. They could certainly fall beyond that, but I don't think too much farther.
No, again, I don't think that either of those guys would fall much further than that, and I don't really anticipate either of them being there at 52. Like, I don't think we're going to have that scenario personally. That's just me, though. I think that you're going to see quarterbacks come off the board in that early second round range. You can see as many as 3 there. If you only get the Willis Pickett 2 quarterback first round mock that we have seen going around a little bit, I think it's fairly reasonable. You see Ritter, Corral, and Howe come off the board fairly quickly early in that second round or late in the first round. With the Lions picking at 32, I think you could see a few teams come up late in the first and grab them. Again, I don't. It could happen. I don't think it's a likely scenario that either of them are there at 52. I think when you get to 52, you're talking more about Carson Strong than anybody. But again, if Howe or Corral is there at 52, I think that is an easy pick.
Is there another day 2 quarterback for you? I have Strong on the kind of edge there. What are your thoughts?
I don't think there is. I'm not a Carson Strong fan. Again, just doesn't really fit what the modern NFL prototype is for good quarterbacks. You need to be a bit of an athlete, and then you have a degenerative knee condition that is really troubling on top of that. And I don't think he's particularly looked very good in this pre-draft process. I don't think he's looked good at the Senior Bowl. Didn't do that well at the Combine. Reportedly, his interviews haven't even been that good. Like, not a lot going for him. And the tape is okay. I don't love the tape. It's kind of, he's good from a mental perspective, but once you get pressure on him and you collapse the pocket, there's very little he can do. I'm not a huge Carson Strong fan. I probably would take him maybe late day 2, like if you're a team in the back end of that round 3 range, like I don't know if he's there and you haven't taken a quarterback, would you consider Carson Strong at 84? Like maybe. But in those late day 2 picks, early day 3-ish range, like if I don't know, if I'm Detroit maybe and I'm in round 4 and I don't have a quarterback yet, maybe I take a swing on Carson Strong.
Yeah, I think the gulf between guys that you reasonably expect to be starting quarterbacks and the ones that you can't say that about is large. And all the guys that you can say that about are going to go before the second round. And to me, Strong is not that. I don't think you could reasonably expect him to be a starting quarterback. I think if you look at like last year's draft, a player like Kellen Mond went like late 3rd, and like that to me feels like about the highest that I could see Carson Strong going is like maybe somebody takes him in the late 3rd, but I think to me probably more like a 4th round pick, early 4th Lions. I could see late day 3, but to me, if I'm the Steelers and I haven't yet to address the quarterback position, I mean, that's what you got Mitch Trubisky for. Like, the Steelers don't need to draft a quarterback in this draft. So specifically talking about the Steelers, I wouldn't take Carson Strong in the 3rd round. Somebody might, if their quarterback depth situation is not as good as Pittsburgh's, but the Steelers have 3 guys that could reasonably be thought to be better than Carson Strong this year. So I don't know why you would take him with a 3rd round pick, especially how deep this class is at places the Steelers have needs like inside linebacker, wide receiver, corner, tackle. Like, there's going to be lots of good players at those positions in the 3rd round. I don't think quarterback is one of them. So to me, I think Strong is a 4th-round pick. And the end of our conversation about day 1 and day 2 quarterbacks and where we have them ranked. Anything else you want to add to that list?
I mean, not really a lot of guys. I mean, the most intriguing guy outside of those is probably Caleb Elliott in terms of what he does. Younger guy, really accurate player, but probably came out a year too early. So that's interesting. I think you have considerable upside with Caleb Elliott. So maybe he pushes into that crowd. Outside of that, though, this isn't really a deep quarterback class. I mean, I don't see a lot of guys that I love even on day 3 that I'm like, yeah, I want to take. Like, I don't even see a ton of guys that stand out as like long-term backup types. Zappy does in that regard, but there's not a ton past that. Like Skylar Thompson, maybe, but who else is there? Like Dustin Crum, Jack Cohn. Not a ton of guys that inspire confidence.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's a lot there to like after the first 5 guys, and certainly not after Strong. I do like Bailey Zappi as a long-term backup. We talked about him last week. All right. Anything else before we wrap up today and wrap up quarterbacks? We're going to go through every position, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say what we like about who we like, kind of put them in order, and then we'll get you all set all the way up to the 2022 NFL Draft.
Yeah, not much else. I think we kind of set our piece on quarterbacks, so I think we're ready to move on.
All right. Well, we will have all the positions covered. I don't know. You want to say where we're going next now? We can put it out there in the universe. What do you want to do? Let's go tackle. I feel like that's the easiest one to cover, and the one we've done the most research on already. So that's always good. Let's talk tackle Tuesday tomorrow then, and we'll wrap things up here with quarterbacks. For Nick, I'm Alan. Make sure you hit like and subscribe here on the YouTube channel so you know when we get every new show, whether that's Mic'd Up in the Mornings with Mike Vukovkin and Mike Asti, or our show, or all the rest of our video content here at Pittsburgh Sports Live, covering the Steelers, covering the Pirates, covering Penn State, covering West Virginia, all kinds of stuff all over the place. So check it out, and we'll see you tomorrow, and have a great day.